The ELGND or Eturns. The great hall of the Galactic Assembly glittered with the light of 3 artificial suns, casting prismatic reflections across the gathered representatives of 17 sentient species. High Admiral Zex Terrell of the Phyrexian Defense Force stood at the observation deck, his 4 eyes scanning the chamber as delegates argued over trade routes and border disputes. His scaled skin shimmered with subtle iridescence as he turned to address the young officers accompanying him on this diplomatic mission. At ease, initiates, Zex Terrell rumbled, his secondary voice sac adding harmonic depth to his words. These assembly meetings often drag on for cycles. While the politicians debate, perhaps you'd care for a history lesson. The 5 junior officers perked up immediately. Admiral Zex Terrell was renowned throughout the fleet not just for his tactical brilliance, but for his knowledge of galactic lore. "Have any of you heard of humans?" the Admiral asked, watching their reactions carefully. Initiate Krell, the youngest of the group, fluttered her sensory frills. "The mythical destroyers, the ones who breathe nitrogen and drink corrosive compounds. Those are just bedtime stories to frighten hatchlings. Some say they could regenerate limbs," offered Initiate Vex Moore, the Admiral's own nephew, "and survive in vacuum for short periods." The other initiates chittered with amusement, but Admiral Zex Terrell didn't join in their laughter. Instead, he gazed out at the distant stars visible through the station's massive viewport. "The old archives suggest they were quite real," he said quietly. "Bipedal mammals with remarkable adaptability. Not particularly strong compared to Dracovians, nor as intelligent as the Kulari collective, but uniquely persistent. Some stories claim they could continue fighting long after species like ours would collapse from exhaustion. But if they existed, where did they go?" asked Initiate Vex Moore. The Admiral's outer eyelids narrowed. "That is the question, isn't it?" In the lower levels of Galactic Assembly Station Prime, Senior Astronomer Telazan adjusted her long-range scanners with trembling fingers. She was Kulari, her body delicate and avian, with pale feathers that had dulled with age. For 3 standard cycles, she had detected anomalous energy signatures from beyond the outer rim, a region designated as Forbidden Zone 773. Each time, she had reported her findings to the Scientific Council, and each time, they had dismissed her concerns. "More sensor ghosts, Astronomer Zan?" her assistant Cleo asked, placing a nutrient solution beside her workstation. "These aren't equipment malfunctions," Tellet insisted, her crest rising with frustration. "Something is out there, Cleo. Something large and moving with purpose." She called up the latest scan results, showcasing energy readings unlike any produced by known species. The pattern was too regular for natural phenomena, too complex for pirate vessels or rogue asteroids. "The signals are getting stronger," she murmured. "Whatever it is, it's coming closer." Cleo leaned in, her young eyes widening at the readings. "Should we report this to security instead of science?" Tella's beak clicked in contemplation. "Perhaps it's time to try a different approach." Deep in the restricted archives section, historian Jin Morovo hunched over ancient data crystals, his tentacle-like appendages carefully extracting information that hadn't been accessed in millennia. As the only archival sentinel with clearance to this section, Jin had spent decades piecing together fragments of pre-assembly history, the dark ages before the 17 species had united. His current project involved cross-referencing myths and legends across cultures to identify common historical truths. And one name kept appearing, despite official records claiming no such species ever existed: human. The data crystal in his manipulator glowed faintly as Jin inserted it into his reader. The screen filled with text in an archaic script, and Jin's respiratory sacs expanded in shock as he translated the first line: "Final report on human containment conflict." His 3 hearts accelerated as he continued reading. According to this ancient document, humans had been real, a species so unpredictable and rapidly advancing that they had frightened the early interstellar powers. Rather than risk continued interaction, Those powers had opted to quarantine human space, establishing the forbidden zones as buffer regions. Most troubling was the document's final warning. Should humans ever breach containment, they must not find us unprepared. Their technological progression rate exceeds all known species by a factor of 7. In the single century we observed them, they advanced from primitive chemical propulsion to early faster-than-light experimentation. Jin's chromatophores paled as he read the date. The document was over 12 centuries old. High above Assembly Station Prime, the first anomaly appeared, a ripple in spacetime that the station's sensors initially registered as a sensor malfunction. Then another appeared, and another, until 17 distortions surrounded the station at equidistant points. From each distortion emerged a vessel of impossible proportions, sleek and obsidian, with pulsing blue energy along geometrically perfect lines. The smallest was twice the size of the Assembly's largest battlecruiser, the largest dwarfed Assembly Station Prime itself. In the Assembly Hall, alarms blared as the emergency system activated. The diplomatic meeting dissolved into chaos as representatives demanded information, protection, and evacuation options, often simultaneously. Admiral Zexterral's communication device chimed with an urgent override. He answered immediately, listening to the frantic report from Fleet Command. Unknown vessels have appeared throughout Assembly space, he informed the initiates, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. 17 capital ships near major worlds and stations, thousands of smaller craft detected at system edges. The Assembly's main viewer activated, showing real-time footage of the massive vessels now surrounding the station. The gathered representatives fell silent, transfixed by the otherworldly ships that made their most advanced vessels look primitive by comparison. "We're receiving a transmission," announced the communications director, her tentacles working frantically across her console. "It's broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously." The screen shifted to show the interior of one of the vessels. Standing center frame was a bipedal being with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head with facial features arranged in a pattern that triggered recognition in the collective subconscious of every species present. The being wore a uniform of deep blue with silver geometric patterns that seemed to shift subtly as it moved. When it spoke, its voice was deep but clear, somehow perfectly comprehensible despite using no known translation technology. "Representatives of the Galactic Assembly," the being said. "I am Fleet Admiral Joanna Chen of the United Earth Confederation. After 12 centuries of isolation, humanity has returned to reclaim our place among the stars." The assembly hall erupted into pandemonium. Jin Moravo rushed through the station corridors, ancient data crystal clutched in his manipulators as he fought against the tide of beings fleeing toward emergency shelters. He had to reach the assembly hall, had to warn them about what the archives revealed. As he rounded the final corner, security barriers blocked his path. Beyond them, he could see Admiral Zexterral conferring with assembly security forces. "Admiral," Jin called out, waving his appendages frantically, "I have critical historical information about the humans." The Admiral's head swiveled toward him, 4 eyes narrowing in recognition. He gestured to the guards, who reluctantly allowed Jin through the checkpoint. "Speak quickly, historian," Zexterral commanded. Jin held up the data crystal. "The humans weren't merely contained or defeated as our fragments of history suggest. They agreed to quarantine after a devastating conflict that both sides realized could end in mutual destruction." The Admiral's scales darkened with concern. "How reliable is this information?" "This is a primary source document, the original peace treaty," Jin explained, "signed by representatives of the Proto-Assembly and human leadership. But the most troubling part is the technological assessment. 12 centuries ago, humans were already approaching technological parity with the combined Proto-Assembly forces. If they've continued advancing at the same rate." He left the implications hanging in the air. Admiral Zexterral's communication device chimed again. "The Assembly Council has agreed to receive a human diplomatic delegation," he informed Jin. "We'll see soon enough what 12 centuries of isolation has brought." The human delegation consisted of 5 individuals, each distinctly different in appearance, yet wearing variations of the same blue and silver uniform. They entered the assembly hall with measured steps, seemingly unaffected by the different gravity and atmospheric composition maintained for the comfort of multiple species. The leader, Admiral Chen, stood at the center. She was flanked by 4 others introduced as Science Director Okafor, Security Chief Volkov, Diplomatic Liaison Torres, and Cultural Attaché Singh. "We understand our arrival has caused concern," Admiral Chen began, addressing the hastily convened emergency assembly. "That was not our intention, though perhaps it was inevitable given our history." Assembly Chairperson Xoril, a massive Dracovian whose armor-plated body dwarfed the humans, leaned forward. "Your ships have positioned themselves near every major assembly world and installation. This appears to be a prelude to military action." "A precaution only," Chen replied calmly. History suggested caution was warranted. "You've been watching us," Admiral Zex Terrell realized aloud. Science Director Okafor, a dark-skinned human with intricate scarification patterns on her face, nodded. "We maintained observation posts beyond the quarantine boundaries. Your expansion has been impressive, but your technological development has followed predictable patterns. Why return now?" demanded Xoril. "The Quarantine Treaty was violated 43 years ago," interrupted Security Chief Volkov, a pale human with ice-blue eyes. "Assembly mining operations breached the outer boundaries of Zone 773. When we investigated, we discovered extensive incursions throughout the quarantine zones." Jin Moravo's chromatophores flushed with dismay. The mining guilds had been pushing exploration into the forbidden zones for decades, claiming the ancient restrictions were based on superstition rather than legitimate security concerns. "That hardly justifies this show of force," Xoril countered. Admiral Chen's expression remained impassive. "The treaty stipulated that any violation would be considered an act of hostility. We could have responded then, but we chose to observe further. What we discovered concerned us greatly." "And what was that?" Zex Terrell asked. "Instability," Chen said simply. "Your assembly is fragmenting from within. Border disputes, resource conflicts, species rivalries suppressed but never resolved. And beyond your borders, threats you've chosen to ignore." The assembly hall grew eerily quiet as the human admiral continued. "We did not return to conquer or to punish, but to offer partnership. In the centuries since our isolation, humanity has faced its own existential challenges. We've learned that survival requires cooperation, not competition." Cultural Attaché Singh, a slender human with elegant hand movements that seemed almost choreographed, stepped forward. "Your histories remember humans as monsters, unpredictable, violent, dangerous. Some of that was true. But isolation forced us to confront our nature, to evolve beyond our destructive tendencies. Or perhaps, Admiral Zex Terrell suggested, you simply became better at concealing them." Singh smiled, the expression somehow both warm and enigmatic. "Skepticism is healthy, Admiral. We expect nothing less. But before this council dismisses our offer, consider this. What exists beyond the outer rim that even humans fear to face alone?" The question hung in the air like a storm front, charged with ominous potential. "Something is coming," Admiral Chen said softly. "Something ancient and patient and hungry. We detected its first probes crossing the intergalactic void 3 centuries ago. We've been preparing ever since, but even humanity's combined might may not be sufficient." Science Director Okafor activated a holographic projector that displayed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red markers appeared at several points along the galactic edge. "These are impact zones where the entity has already begun infiltration," she explained. "Its nature defies easy categorization. Part organic, part energy, wholly alien. It does not communicate. It does not negotiate. It simply consumes and converts." "If this threat is real," Thoril said, Why should we believe humans would stand with us rather than sacrifice us to save yourselves? Admiral Chen's gaze swept across the gathered representatives. Because 12 centuries ago, your ancestors could have obliterated Earth after containing our fleets. Instead, they offered quarantine, a chance for humanity to develop in isolation rather than extinction. We have not forgotten that mercy. She paused, then added with quiet intensity, and because whatever differences exist between us, we are all children of this galaxy. Its fate is our shared inheritance. As if timed to punctuate her words, every communication device in the assembly hall activated simultaneously with an emergency override. The main viewer switched to display a live feed from an outer monitoring station at the very edge of assembly space. On screen, an assembly research outpost orbiting a distant moon was being enveloped by a shifting mass of darkness that seemed to devour light itself. The station's distress beacon transmitted for exactly 37 seconds before falling silent. In the frozen silence that followed, Admiral Chen spoke a single sentence that would forever alter the course of galactic history. The void has arrived. The common enemy. The emergency council chamber on Assembly Station Prime had never been designed to accommodate representatives from 18 species. The addition of the human delegation had required hasty modifications, yet the bipedal newcomers seemed perfectly comfortable in the improvised seating arrangements. 3 standard days had passed since the humans' dramatic arrival and the simultaneous first appearance of what they called the Void. In that time, 4 more assembly outposts had gone silent, each disappearance preceded by the same haunting visual, structures engulfed by a darkness that consumed rather than merely obscured. High Admiral Zex Terrell studied the latest tactical projections with growing dread. If the entity continued its current expansion pattern, it would reach heavily populated assembly worlds within 2 standard months. The Void is accelerating its advance, observed Admiral Chen, her voice cutting through the tense murmurs filling the chamber. It's adapting to local space-time conditions faster than our models predicted. Science Director Okafor manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on the affected regions. Each assimilated outpost provides it with new material to incorporate, not just physical matter, but information. It learns from what it consumes. Then we must evacuate the border systems immediately, insisted Chairperson Floral, their massive claws clicking against the metallic table. We cannot sacrifice our citizens to this. Aberration. Evacuation alone is insufficient, countered Admiral Chen. The Void doesn't just consume matter, it converts it. Each planet, each station it absorbs increases its mass and intelligence. If we simply retreat, we only delay the inevitable. So you propose we fight? Asked Admiral Zex Terrell. With what weapons? Our preliminary analysis suggests conventional armaments have minimal effect on this entity. Security Chief Volkov stepped forward, activating his own data projection. A series of technical schematics appeared, showing modifications to standard assembly vessel designs. We've developed specialized countermeasures based on our encounters with similar phenomena, he explained. Phase-shifted energy weapons that disrupt the Void's quantum coherence, preventing it from maintaining structural integrity. Jin Moravo, the historian who had been granted permanent observer status due to his knowledge of human assembly history, raised a tentacle in question. You've encountered this entity before, he asked. Admiral Chen exchanged glances with her team before responding. Not this specific entity, but others of similar composition. What you call the Forbidden Zones were established not just to contain humanity, but to create buffer regions against incursions from outside the galaxy. A stunned silence fell over the assembly representatives. You mean to say, Sorrel finally rumbled, that our ancestors knew of these threats? Some suspected, Chen corrected. But at the time, the proto-assembly was more concerned with containing human expansion than preparing for extragalactic threats. After the Quarantine Treaty, humans had no choice but to focus our attention outward, beyond the galaxy's edge. What we found there changed us forever. The implications hung heavy in the air. While the assembly species had been concerning themselves with internal politics and gradual expansion, humanity had been facing cosmic horrors alone. "We propose a joint defense initiative," Admiral Chen continued, her calm demeanor unchanged despite the gravity of her revelations. Human vessels equipped with void countermeasures providing perimeter defense, while assembly forces evacuate threatened systems and establish fallback positions. "And what guarantee do we have?" asked a Kulari representative, her feathers bristling with suspicion. "That once this threat is contained, humans won't simply turn these specialized weapons against the assembly." For the first time, Admiral Chen's composure showed a crack, a fleeting expression of something between disappointment and resignation. "If we wanted to conquer the assembly," she said quietly, "we would not have announced our presence with a diplomatic delegation. Nor would we have warned you about the void. We would have simply waited for it to weaken your defenses, then claimed what remained." Diplomatic liaison Torres, who had remained silent throughout most of the discussions, stepped forward. "We understand your concerns. Trust requires time we may not have. So let us propose a compromise. Joint command of all defense operations, human and assembly officers working side by side, with full transparency." Admiral Zex Terrell found himself nodding before he had consciously decided to agree. The proposal was reasonable. Better than reasonable, it was necessary. Yet he could see the reluctance on many of his colleagues' faces. "I volunteer to serve as assembly liaison to the human flagship," he announced, surprising even himself with the declaration. "I will personally observe their operations and report directly to this council." The human flagship Horizon defied everything Admiral Zex Terrell thought he knew about spacecraft design. From the outside, it had appeared imposing but comprehensible, a massive vessel of obvious military purpose. Inside, it was a revelation. "Our ship designs prioritize adaptability," explained Commander Rice, the human officer assigned as his guide. "The internal configuration can be recalibrated for different mission parameters, or to accommodate allied species." The commander was leading him through corridors that seemed to shift subtly as they walked, adjusting to the Vrexians' greater height and different atmospheric preferences. "Is this some form of holographic projection?" Zex Terrell asked, running a scaled hand along a wall that had just widened to prevent his shoulder spines from brushing against it. "No, Admiral. The entire vessel incorporates programmable matter at the molecular level," Rice replied. "It's actually physically reconfiguring itself." Zex Terrell's four eyes blinked in sequence, a Vrexian expression of profound surprise. Such technology would require computing power beyond anything in assembly records. Commander Rice smiled slightly. "We've had 12 centuries to innovate, Admiral." They continued their tour, passing crew quarters, recreational areas, and science labs where humans worked alongside sophisticated machinery. Zex Terrell noted the absence of other species and wondered if the humans truly were as isolated as they claimed. "Here we are," Rice announced as they reached a massive circular chamber at the heart of the vessel. "Central Command." The space was dominated by a three-dimensional tactical display showing real-time updates from across assembly space. Human officers moved with practiced efficiency around holographic interfaces that responded to gestures, voice commands, and what appeared to be direct neural inputs via subtle implants at their temples. Admiral Chen stood at the center, conversing with her senior staff. She acknowledged Zex Terrell's arrival with a respectful nod. "Admiral, welcome to the Horizon. I trust Commander Rice has made you comfortable." "Your ship is impressive," Zex Terrell admitted, "though I find myself wondering why beings with such advanced technology would concern themselves with the assembly at all." Chen gestured toward the tactical display, where red indicators showed the void's expanding influence. "Because some threats transcend old rivalries, Admiral. The void doesn't discriminate between human or assembly worlds. It consumes all." She led him to a secondary display, showing a detailed analysis of the entity's composition. "We've been tracking similar incursions for centuries. They begin as scout tendrils, semi-autonomous extensions of a larger consciousness. If left unchecked, they establish beachheads, then expand exponentially. And your weapons can destroy it. Not destroy, Chen corrected. The void exists partially outside normal spacetime. We can disrupt its coherence, force it to retreat, but permanent destruction would require striking at its extra-dimensional anchor point. Which is where? Zex Terrell asked. Unknown, Chen admitted. But each encounter provides more data, bringing us closer to a solution. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert. The tactical display zoomed in on Outpost Krell 7, a minor assembly research station near the expanding void perimeter. Void contact imminent at Krell 7, reported a human officer. Station is reporting unusual energy fluctuations consistent with early-stage infiltration. How many personnel? Chen asked sharply. 17 researchers, plus support staff. Approximately 50 beings total. Chen turned to Zex Terrell. This is an opportunity to demonstrate our countermeasures in a controlled scenario. With your permission, Admiral, I'd like to deploy a rapid response team. Zex Terrell hesitated only briefly. Granted, but I will accompany them. The response vessel was unlike any shuttle Zex Terrell had ever encountered, sleek, silent, and capable of speeds that should have liquefied its occupants. Yet he felt only the slightest pressure as they accelerated to what the humans casually referred to as transition velocity. The team consisted of 8 humans in specialized armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They carried weapons that defied easy categorization, not quite energy projectors, not quite kinetic accelerators, but something that existed in the conceptual space between. Neural-linked phase disruptors, explained Lieutenant Quan, the team leader, noticing Zex Terrell's interest. They identify and target the dimensional frequencies the void uses to maintain cohesion. And the armor. Quantum entangled mesh with variable phase capabilities, Quan replied. It allows us to exist slightly out of sync with normal spacetime, harder for the void to latch onto. The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but before Zex Terrell could inquire further, they arrived at Outpost Krell 7. The station hung in space, outwardly unchanged but surrounded by an unsettling visual distortion, as if reality itself were being gently pulled toward it. Sensor readings showed massive energy fluctuations throughout the structure. Life signs, Quan demanded. 38 confirmed, replied the shuttle's pilot. Clustered in the central research hub, the void has already infiltrated the outer sections. Lieutenant Quan turned to his team. Standard extraction protocol. Phase synchronization at 0.7 to minimize void interaction. Neural shields at maximum. Then, to Zex Terrell's surprise, the lieutenant addressed him directly. Admiral, this isn't a combat situation we can guarantee your safety in. I respectfully suggest you remain aboard the shuttle. Zex Terrell's scales darkened with determination. Denied, Lieutenant. My people are on that station. I will observe your methods firsthand. Quan nodded, apparently unsurprised by the response. As you wish, Admiral. Stay between Specialists Chen and Rodriguez at all times. Their phase fields will extend to cover you, but the protection is limited. Do not, under any circumstances, touch the void manifestations. The boarding party transferred to the station through what the humans called a phase corridor, a tunnel of stabilized spacetime that bypassed the station's compromised docking systems. Inside, Zex Terrell's worst fears were confirmed. The outer corridors were covered in a shifting, semi-translucent material that seemed to simultaneously absorb and emit light. Where it touched the station's structure, matter was visibly transforming, metal and composite materials becoming the same strange substance. The air itself felt wrong, as if fundamental physical laws were being selectively reinterpreted. The human team moved with practiced precision, their weapons emitting pulses of energy that caused the void material to recoil and dissipate temporarily. They didn't speak aloud but clearly communicated through their neural interfaces, moving in perfect coordination. As they pushed deeper into the station, they encountered the first affected crew member, a Quillary technician whose body was partially engulfed by void material. The beam's movements were jerky and unnatural, its vocalizations a disturbing blend of normal speech and incomprehensible harmonics. "Please, it's in my mind. Can hear its thoughts," the technician struggled to say, before lunging toward the nearest human with inhuman speed. The specialist didn't hesitate, firing a contained burst that encompassed the infected technician. The void material separated from theQuillary's body, dissipating into particles that quickly evaporated. The technician collapsed, unconscious but apparently unharmed. "He'll live," confirmed Specialist Rodriguez after scanning the fallen crew member. Neural patterns returning to baseline. No permanent conversion detected. They proceeded through the station, encountering more void manifestations and affected crew members. Each time, the human team responded with the same efficient precision, neutralizing the void presence without harming the infected individuals. Zex Terrell watched in growing admiration. Assembly security protocols for similar contamination scenarios called for immediate quarantine and, if necessary, neutralization of affected personnel. Yet these humans were going to extraordinary lengths to save every individual, regardless of species. When they finally reached the central research hub, they found the remaining uninfected crew barricaded behind improvised energy barriers. The station's Phyrexian security chief recognized Zex Terrell immediately. "Admiral, we thought reinforcements would never arrive," he exclaimed, before registering the human team with visible confusion. "These are human specialists," Zex Terrell confirmed. "Experts in countering this type of threat." The security chief's confusion deepened. "Humans, the myth species, apparently not so mythical," Zex Terrell replied. "And fortunately for us all, far more advanced than our history suggested." The briefing hall on Assembly Station Prime had never been so crowded. Representatives from all 17 assembly species packed the tiered seating, with thousands more joining virtually from across assembly space. On the central platform stood Admiral Chen alongside Chairperson Thorl, presenting a unified front that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. The successful evacuation of Outpost Krell 7 demonstrates the effectiveness of human countermeasures against the void, Thorl announced. All 53 personnel were recovered safely, with only minor casualties. "But this was merely a scout tendril," Admiral Chen cautioned. "Our sensors indicate multiple larger incursions forming along the galactic rim. The void is accelerating its advance, learning from each encounter." She activated the holographic display, showing a time-lapse of the void's expansion over the past week. Red indicators pulsed at 17 different entry points, a number that struck many observers as suspiciously familiar. "We propose establishing joint defense perimeters at these strategic locations," Chen continued, highlighting positions well inward from the void's current advance. "Human vessels equipped with phase disruptors will form the front line, with assembly forces providing secondary defense and evacuation support. And if these defenses fail," called out a representative from the back of the hall. Admiral Chen's expression remained steady. "Then we fall back to the next defensive line, and the next, fighting for every system, every planet, every life. But we will not fail if we stand together." The chamber filled with murmurs, some skeptical, others hopeful. Admiral Zex Terrell stepped forward to stand beside Chen and Thorl. "I have witnessed human countermeasures firsthand," he declared. "Their technology exceeds our most advanced systems by centuries. More importantly, I have seen their commitment to preserving life. All life, regardless of species." He turned to face Admiral Chen directly. 12 centuries ago, our ancestors feared humans for their unpredictability, their adaptability, their capacity for both creation and destruction. Today, those same qualities may be our salvation. The murmurs grew louder, but now with a different tenor, less fearful, more determined. One by one, representatives stood to signal their support until the entire chamber was on its feet. Chairperson Thorl raised their massive claws for silence. "Then it is decided. For the first time in 12 centuries, the Assembly and humanity will act as one. Let this day mark not just an alliance against the void, but the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. As the Assembly erupted in approval, Jin Moravo observed from his historian's alcove, recording every detail of this historic moment. Yet even as he documented the proceedings, a part of his consciousness pondered the strange symmetry of it all. 17 entry points for the void. 17 human capital ships appearing simultaneously across assembly space. 17 species in the Galactic Assembly. Coincidence, or something more deliberate, a pattern with meaning beyond current understanding. 3 standard months into what was now officially designated the Void War, the combined forces of humanity and the Assembly had established a stable defensive perimeter. The Void's advance had been halted at 14 of the 17 incursion points, though at tremendous cost. Aboard the Horizon, now serving as Joint Command Headquarters, Admiral Zex Terrell and Admiral Chen reviewed the latest battle reports. Outpost Delta 9 has been successfully evacuated, Zex Terrell noted. All personnel accounted for, though the station itself was lost. Chen nodded, her expression grim. The Void is adapting faster now. Our phase disruptors are becoming less effective with each engagement. Your science director mentioned a theoretical weapon, something that could target the Void's extra-dimensional anchor. Project Severance, Chen confirmed. It's progressed beyond theory, but deployment presence. Challenges. She activated a secure holographic display, showing a device no larger than a standard shuttle. Its internal structure defied conventional engineering principles, components arranged in patterns that seemed to fold in upon themselves impossibly. This device can generate a harmonic cascade that propagates through all dimensions the Void inhabits simultaneously, Chen explained. In theory, it would sever its connection to our spacetime entirely. In theory, Zex Terrell questioned. The calculations are sound, Chen assured him. The problem is delivery. The device must be activated at the precise center of the Void's main mass, what we believe is its primary consciousness. Understanding dawned on Zex Terrell. A suicide mission. We've had volunteers, Chen said quietly. But even with our most advanced shielding, the pilot would have approximately 73 seconds from insertion to complete system failure. The Void would consume them entirely. Zex Terrell studied the device schematics in silence, his tactical mind analyzing variables and probabilities. What if the pilot didn't need to survive that long? Chen looked at him sharply. Explain. Assembly biomechanical interfaces are designed differently from human neural links, Zex Terrell said. Our connections prioritize maintaining consciousness even when physical systems are compromised. You're suggesting an assembly pilot could maintain control longer than a human. I'm suggesting, Zex Terrell said carefully, that I could maintain control long enough. Chen's expression shifted to one of surprise, then respect, then concern. Admiral, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, Zex Terrell interrupted. I volunteered. My species evolved to operate in extreme conditions. Our neural pathways remain functional even when major body systems shut down. If your calculations are correct, I could likely maintain consciousness for up to 3 minutes in void-saturated conditions. Even so, it would mean certain death, Chen said softly. Zex Terrell's scales rippled in what humans had come to